Good morning. We're learning as a schus for Shlema for Ilana Chaya Bas Serach. Where are we up to? I don't know. I can't find the place. Um, some reason. I think we are up to are we on Ayin Tes Amud Aleph? Yeah, yeah. We're at the Mishnah towards the bottom of Ayin Tes Amud Aleph. Hanesachim shekitshu bekli. Nesachim, that's generally the wine that goes along with the Ayla and the Shlamim. Shekitchu b'kli, once it was put into a kli sharis, v'nimtza zevach pasel, and then we were talking about the taida, the chalas of the taida, what happens then. So now we're talking about another accompanying part of a carbon. So you have nesachim that go along with the carbon. And then it turned out that the carbon itself was pasel. Im yesh zevach achar yakrivi imay. You can switch the nesachim to go with a different carbon. You'd set aside a oila. He was bringing an oila, and he was makadosh the nesachim, and then his oila went kaput. As the Gemara will discuss at which point it became possible. So if you just take the nesachim and you apply it to a different oila, v'imlav yifsalu belina. They changed the word v'imlav. V'imlanu yifsalu belina. But if he doesn't, that will come out to mean if he doesn't have another alternative carbon to attach the nesachim to, then it'll become possible. It already became a kuddush in the kli sharis. So once somebody gets a kedushas haguf from a kli sharis, once it gets kedushas haguf, however it is, it has to be brought that day. If it goes past the time, it becomes possible. Now, as always, I'm a little uncomfortable when I read the Mishnah because the Gemara will somewhat modify our understanding of what the Mishnah is saying. And right away, Amar Zeiri says something which seems to contradict right away what we said in the Mishnah. He says, unlike what we just said in the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to bring it up in a second, that Nesachim become Mekudesh when you shech the carbon. Not with, they don't become Kaddish with the shechita of the with being put in a kli sharis. But when the nesachim go along with the carbon, when you shech the carbon, at that point, the nesachim get a kedusha tzedakah. My time, what does he learn it from? Amakra zevach u'nesachim. The Torah says, "Eilamay l'shem tikku moisem moya asher tikku moisem mikroi kodesh lahakav isha l'shem oilo mincha zevach u'nesachim dvar yoyim zevach u'nesachim." So first you have the zevach, then the nesachim become a kodesh as well. Should be familiar this pasuk. I think we've seen it once or twice. Tznan. Hanesachim. So we ask from our Mishnah. Hanesachim shekitcher bekliv nimtza zevach pasuk. It says belina. Our Mishnah said that it becomes mekudesh. Nesachim become mekudesh with being put in a kli sharis, and that makes it kaddish. That if it's lawn, it's going to be possible. So that's not like Ziri, who had said that it comes with the shchit zevach. So the Gemara, my lav, when we say that if the nimtza zevach pasul means that it became pasul with shchita, and therefore never had the shchita, so how could you say that the kli sharis is mekadosh? So the ifsul bezrika. We're talking about it was ifsul bezrika. So when the Mishnah said that it becomes, according to Zir, when the Mishnah said it becomes mekudesh with the kli sharis, shekdisha with kli sharis, that it becomes kaddish, it means with the kli sharis together with the shechita. And this, when we talk about that, became possible when the carbon became possible, it took us about after Shechita. So Einachanami, it's like Ziri would say, the Mishnah doesn't mean, even though it said, when you put it there, it becomes Kaddish, the Sachem become Kaddish. Bekli, it means Bekli together with Shechita. And when it said at the end of the Mishnah that if the carbon became possible, it will become the Nesach, and you don't have another replacement, it will become possible, that's talking about not where it became possible by Shechita, but rather it became possible later on by Zrika.
So what does it mean, the Yitzu Belin? That means you have to wait until the next day for it to become possible, and if you find a
No,
korban before that.
we're not saying you have to wait. We're saying if you don't have another carbon to replace it with, then by the next day, it's going to be it got a kedushas haguf. This nesachim are full-fledged kachim, and kachim that are part of a carbon, they have a time limit on them, and when the time limit will pass, then you will no longer be able to attach it to another carbon because it will be possible.
In other words, you have until the next morning to find a replacement korban to save that those nesachim.
Well, it's really that day, right? Because the avodah, I don't think the sacham are brought during the night. I guess, but it says in Lanu means overnight. Yeah. Whatever the time limit is. Once the time limit passes for when they were supposed to have been brought, maybe Nesachim, a Murim and Nesachim maybe can be done overnight. So if you find another replacement overnight, then you're good. You pour it out and use this. But if not, you're out of luck. It's puzzled and it can no longer be Nesachim. You're probably going to have to bring it to the Beis Hadeshen to be disposed of. Zok the Gemara, Kaman. Who is this like? Karebi. This L'chaira, this that was saying that after the Shechita, but before the Zrika, it becomes Kaddish, that it's the Nesachim become Kaddish, that it's going to become Ifsa Belina. That's Rebbe. The Amar Shnei Dvar Ha'atir Man Zeh B'loi Zeh. We had a machlekes l'gabi the shtei halechem. The shtei halechem comes together with chalos. It's kivsei atzeres come together with the shtei halechem, the two minchas, the two lechem that go along with it. So we said before we had this gemara a while back. Rebbe said that since there are two things that are needed, you need both the shchita and the zrika of the kivsei atzeres for the shtei halechem to become Mekadosh. He says if you have only one of them, if you only had the shechita but you didn't have the zrika, that it's going to be Kaddish ve'en a Kaddish. So L'chaira was saying, but according to Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon over there, he says it's not Kaddish at all. You have to have both the shechita and the zrika. He says when you have a carbon that's being Mekadosh, something associated with it. In that case, it's Shtei Halechem. In our case, it's the Nesachim. Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon says you have to have both of the matirim, both of the permitters, both of the things that are necessary to be matir. It's not just the shechita; you also need the zrika. So the Chayra Arkamar is saying that with just the shechita, Ziri is understanding our Mishnah that just the shechita is enough to make the Nesachim Kaddish. The Gemara says L'chari is like Rebbe. But the Gemara no, Afilu Temer Rebbe Elazar Shimon. Going like Rebbe Elazar Shimon. Hachmaiskin Kochi Kibul Dam B'Kois V'Nishpach. And there was a shechita, and they were makabel the dam, and the dam fell down, it spilled out, and therefore there's no dam left to do zrika. So then, how is that any different? Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon Savala Kavase Davua. Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon holds like his father, Reb Shimon the Amar Kala Oimed Lizrik Kazarak Dami. Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon says that something that's going to be zarak is considered as if it's zarak. Now, Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon had said that you need both the matirim in order to be mater, in order to be mekadosh, but he says that it still is enough to be mafsa belina. So let's see the Rashi on the top of the Amud. We're not going to look. There's not much in the Rashi and the Ksav Yad, so we'll look at the regular Rashi. Right at the top, that it's therefore, since something that's going to be Zarak is as if it's Zarak, therefore it becomes Makudish with the two Matir and Beshchit Bezrika. It's not considered that there was a Rizrika Zevach Kasha. It's not considered it's a Zevach Kasher that even though there was no actual Zrika, we treat it as if there was a Zrika. But it's only saying that if you have another something else, this that the Lachmei Taido or the Nesachim, that they can go Lachmei Taido. It's not really relevant, but by the Nesachim, if there's another, you can use this yayin with another carbon. Mishum the Savar Kirshim and the Amar Kalayim and Lizu Kazara Dami. So he says that it's enough. It's only enough that it's going to make it that you can bring it for something else. But it's going to be possible that it's going to become possible belina. It's enough of a hektish that first of all that we can bring it. It's not so makudish you can't bring it with something else, but it's makudish enough because of this kala oim and lizard kazara dami that it will become possible. Amar Mar. How could that be that if there's another zevach, you can be makta, you can use this nesachim together with the other carbon? We say if someone has, oh, good morning, Dovi.
Morning.
Shemen shefrishu l'shumin chazu, pasul l'shumin chacharis. If you have shemen that was set aside for one mincha, you can't then switch it and use it for another mincha. So why are we saying that nesachim was set aside for one carbon could go for a different carbon? Rav Yanai led Bezdin masna lein. Rav Yanai says a groisa chiddush that Bezdin, even though this is really was set aside, this nesachim was set for one carbon, Bezdin makes a t'nai that if something will happen with this carbon that the nesachim are not capable of being brought with it, it should go with something else. They made a t'nai that if it's needed for this carbon, then Bezdin wants it to be for this carbon. If not, it should go for another carbon. So the Gemara asks the obvious question: Yachi shemen nami. So why do we say by the shemen that if the carbon, if you set aside shemen for one carbon, you can't bring it for another mincha? So Gemara shemen gufa de minchahu. Shemen is different. Shemen is mixed in with the silus. It's an integral part of the carbon. So the Bezdin doesn't make a t'nai to take something that's a full-fledged part of a carbon. But the nesachim that are sort of a separate but equal part of the carbon, so that the Bezdin made a t'nai on it. In fact, the Gemara, if that's the case, if Bezdin's making a t'nai that the nesachim should be able to be brought together with another carbon, why do they have to make it that if you happen to have another one, then it's going to be brought with the other one, with another carbon? But if you don't have another carbon, then it becomes possibilina. Let them say that it's not kaddish at all, and you have a full option to redo it to make it chulin altogether. So no, that Bezdin doesn't do. Once the nesachim was in a klisharis, even though theoretically Bezdin has the ability to make a t'nai that something that's even if it's going into a klisharis, they are making a t'nai in it that it shouldn't become kaddish. We don't want people to see it and say that something that was in a klisharis, in the case where there was no t'nai Bezdin, that it becomes it's not kaddish. Back to the Gemara, if that's the case, if we're worried about Xera, that people will see it and think something went in the klisharis is going to be baitzi l'chul. And hashanam Xera shem v'nechasim shefishon l'shum zebach zeh kshein l'shum zebach acher. if you're going to say it's only because when there's a Tnai Bezdin, then why are you saying it? Why are you allowing you to use it for another carbon? That also is not allowed unless there's a Tnai. So people, why are we afraid that people are going to get confused about that? So Gemara, Tani Matasi ben Yehuda, Goy Jehaya Zevach Zavuach Ba'is Shah. Matasi ben Yehuda says we're talking about when there was already a carbon that had been brought at the exact time that you put these nesachim into klisharis. So therefore, you can seamlessly switch it over, and no one will even realize that it wasn't originally intended for this other carbon. So Gemara, if that's the case, he's saying if it's not a carbon set aside available there, my nifsal belina. Our Mishnah said that if you don't have a second carbon, then it becomes possibilina. So I'm sorry. So we're saying that if you don't have a second carbon, then we're going to, the T'nai Bezin is not going to take effect, and it's going to immediately become possible because you don't have you can't switch it over without this problem that people are going to think that you're able to do it l'chatchila. So the Gemara, if that's the case, let me say im lanu yifsalu belina. If it gets left over, it'll become possible belina. Why do we have to say that if he leaves it over, if there's no carbon available, that it will become possible? Why don't we just say it's not just that there's another carbon before the end of the day, but if there was no carbon available immediately, so why don't we say? Why did the Mishnah say that? So Hachanami, that's what it meant. Hachanami Ka'amar. What did the Mishnah say? That you can switch the Nesachim when the original Zevach became possible. That's when there was another carbon already that was Shecht. It will become possible immediately, Belina. That's what the Mishnah was saying. So tomorrow,
So, so our understanding that you have to lina to replace the korban, that's totally awful. It's totally wrong now. In other words, you have to have a korban in place at the time where the first one became possible.
Right. Well, we had thought before that if you shechted the carbon, you go and look to see if you can find another carbon. If an hour later someone checks a carbon, or we're talking about if this person has another ayla that he brings an hour later, then you can put it together. Now, the 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 Gemara is really talking about here about nisachim that are from the tzibur, and that's what we're talking about. So what? So we're talking about a nisachim of a carbon tzibur. So we're saying like if they already had prepared another carbon, if there was a carbon that was already we had thought that if you let's say it's a musaf, oil for a musaf. So we had thought that so let's wait an hour. We'll see if they have another carbon to be brought for that musaf, and then they'll apply the nesachim. The leiv bezin was masna that you could do it. So Gemara is saying no, it had to have been done previously, but einachanami, it's still going to be the case that ultimately what's going to passel it is lina, right? If you don't have a well, there's two things that could pass. It could be if you don't have another carbon, eventually it will be lina, or you can have this takanas chachamim that you're not allowed to switch to nesachim because then people will think you're allowed to do so. So therefore, it has to be that there was another carbon that was already pre-slaughtered, it was pre-shechted prior to this. So that's what we're switching now. We're saying that in addition to the fact that if it's lawn, it's going to passel it. We also are geyser that we don't let you switch it over, even though Leib Bezin was masna, and there really is no reason to passel this nesachim, because they could have theoretically made it, the T'nai could have made it chulin altogether, but they said as long as you already have another carbon ready to go, we're not going to be geyser on it. So it's really, we're talking now about Xeris more than we're talking about actual lina. Because this thing is not really Makudish, or it won't be Makudish unless if Bezin makes a Tanai on it.
So another korban already had to be shechted before that. That doesn't have nesachim available for it. Like what's the scenario?
They didn't. Oh, they right. They didn't set aside nesachim for it. You don't have to do a kaddish nesachim in the kli before you shech the carbon. So let's say they were supposed to bring, 10 oilis for a musaf and sukkahs, right? There's all these different karbanas. There's numerous karbanas that you bring. So
Hmm.
they had 10 karbanas lined up, and they shechted one, and then they set aside the nesachim for they they set aside they shechted carbon B, and then they set aside its nesachim with the snai bestin, and then nesachim carbon B, it died or became puzzle. So we're saying as long as carbon A was already shechted, you quickly switch over nesachim from carbon B to carbon A. But if it had been Nisachim for carbon A, that you shechted carbon A, you can't then go shecht carbon B afterwards, because then people will think, as a general rule, even when it's not a carbon tzibur, that you can just take someone else's carbon. So you take Nisachim from one carbon and switch it to another one, which you generally you can't do. It's only because of the Tanai Besin that you can do it over here. So we want it to be that no one realizes that it's being switched over. So we won't have this gzeir.
In that case, that whole time frame of lina doesn't even apply. It's either you have another korban shechted,
Right,
or it's going to be
right.
puzzle.
You're asking a good question. The Mefarshim ask, what's the use of waiting at that point once there's no lay bezin? So you're not going to be able to apply it to anything else anyway. So
Right.
it should be puzzle right away. So that the question is, do you what is the gzeres chacham? The gzera that it should be. Let's say we'll treat it like a regular nesachim that even though in theory there's nothing you're going to be able to do with it, but you still have to wait for it to become it's kaddish kedushas aguf. You can't just dispose of it. We often find you wait with it until it becomes ruined, which means you have to wait till there's lina, till it becomes pasul lina before you can dispose of it. So that's a question over here. Do you have to wait for the lina to dispose of it, or you can just dispose of it immediately? That's a good question.
Mhm.
Okay. Sagt the Gemara, Umi Isle of Shimon lay Bezdin Masnalein. Does he really hold that even though this Nisachim was attached to one carbon, Bezdin, when they gave it, when it was dedicated, when it was Makudish, they made a t'nai that if something goes wrong, they could be able to apply it to a different carbon. Tmidim shalei hutzrachul etzibu. We went through this before. This was a different. I think back in Zvachim that they used to have always six tmidim in reserve. They had six animals waiting in the lishka, and in order to make sure that they had enough in case it was like a 2 day Yom Tov, that they would have the tmidim that they needed for each day of Yom Tov. So, but the problem is when it comes to the end of the year, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, when they come to the turnover of the year, they have four leftovers that you can't use what was dedicated for one year in the following year. They would do the machzah shekel to buy the animals for the forthcoming year, and if you have four leftover animals from the previous year, they can't be brought. So these are tmidim shalei hutzar cholitzibur. L'dir Shimon ein niftin tmimin. According to Rav Shimon, they cannot be padi as tmimin. You have to wait for them to get a mum. Now, why don't we say leiv bezdin masna lein? They were put into this year's cheshbon of tmidim by the bezdin. So let bezdin make a t'nai that if there's leftover, that they could be padi. So according to the liver of Shimon, ein niftin, liver chum niftin tmimin. So according to why doesn't the chum say you ein a you could be paid to them, even without a mum, because it's leiv bezdin masna lein. So Gemara, Shani Hasam, this looked at Kanta Beria. Gemara says over there it's different. We're not talking about Nesach, we're talking about an animal. An animal, you could wait for it to get a mum, you could be Roya, and then you could be Paidet. So Rav Shimon holds that you could, he says, Lay Bezdin Masna Lay, and only in the case of Nesachim, which you don't have the option of Riyah. But over there you have the option of Riyah, so therefore we we don't impose on them that they should that we don't impose on them that they have to let it be possible lina, but you could be Roya actually is okay. I think we're going to stop over here. It's a little bit late, and I got to get to davening. I don't know if anyone else is a kayan, but